Hello, my name is Nathan Evans and welcome to the premiere episode of Tactile Talks. Tactile Talks is a podcast aimed at having valuable discussions around accessibility and disability with those that are on the ground floor. And it's my pleasure to introduce to you Celia from Disabled by Society, a team set up to improve accessibility for those with disabilities by highlighting and enabling the removal of barriers that remain invisible to many of us. Their focus is on consultation for businesses and governmental bodies alike, both national and international, and helping them along their ableism journey. So very, very much welcome to you and congratulations on the success of your book.
Thank you very much. And thank you for having me in the premiere episode. I'm very excited to be a part of this. It's going to be amazing. It's going to be a good conversation.
Absolutely, absolutely. How is the book currently trending? Because I believe it is a bit of a smash hit.
Yeah, I mean, it took us by complete surprise and we're still living on absolute cloud nine. So we managed to get onto the charts when it was just pre-order, which blew our minds as it was. And then within about 6 hours, we sold out in America, which was, again, just mind-blowing considering the time difference. And it was the morning here, so it was the middle of the night in America. And then very quickly, within about 24 hours, we were number one in the charts, which was just amazing. And now we're still in the charts kind of a couple of weeks later and going up and down and up and down. And people have been ordering like bonkers, and it's just been amazing. And seeing people kind of post things on LinkedIn or message us there from, Argentina or Croatia, all four corners of the world has just been incredible. Yeah. Very, very grateful. Very, very grateful.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's fun. I imagine there's a few reprints coming as well with the with the hype.
Yes. And
Plenty to look forward to.
Rina and I were in Waterstones the other day on International Day of Persons with Disability, and we saw the book in the wild for the first time in Waterstones because that was the first time we'd actually gone hunting for it. And there was only one copy left that was on pre-reserve as well. So we had to very kindly ask if we were allowed to actually touch our own book. But it was just the most amazing feeling to walk into an actual bookstore and there being only one copy left and it being on reserve. So that was incredible as well. But yeah, they are restocking in Waterstones. If anyone is passing the Waterstones and wanting to purchase.
Fantastic news. Just for the uninitiated, do you want to give people a bit of a rundown about what the book's about?
So I have a copy here for anybody that's watching on video. Unlearning Ableism is effectively the ultimate no-nonsense guide to understanding disability. So we've broken it down into lots of different chapters, with the aim being that if you pick it up, you can read any chapter at any given time. You don't have to read it from page 1 all the way through to the end to be able to get the information that you're looking for. And we've covered topics from the workplace to disability history to understanding policy, understanding internalized ableism. And it's just the ultimate guide to everything you could possibly want to know. And Jamie and I obviously recognize our privileges that we have as two white individuals living in the 40th most developed country in the world. So what we've done is we gathered about 34 contributors from all over the world who've also lended their voice, who are experts in each subject. So it is really an amalgamation of diversity of disability voice, but it's not like a textbook. Like you're not picking it up and thinking, my goodness, this is boring. It's like being educated at school. It's funny, it's witty, it's anecdotal. So not to shameless plug, but I really highly recommend if anybody is looking for something to kind of expand their knowledge, whether as a disabled person or a non-disabled person, that this book is the place to be. So yeah, it's called Unlearning Ableism and it's available worldwide, basically on any book platform that you could think of.
Fantastic. I'm still waiting for my copy. I've got to order it from Amazon Germany.
Okay.
Just to get it to Hungary. We've not got the best shipping infrastructure. It's all right. I shouldn't say that. I shouldn't be disrespectful to my hosts. But yeah. So what are you hoping that the book achieves just in the round?
I mean, global reach is one of the biggest things. It's very apparent the disparity in disability rights all across the world. And I think all of us can kind of put 2 and 2 together and realize what is happening in various parts of the world. So that's one of our biggest aims. But I think it's about making ableism part of our everyday vocabulary, much like how we use the word sexism, homophobia, racism. Ableism is still very much forgotten in those isms and those phobias. That's not me sitting here saying we are where we need to be in terms of breaking down barriers around racism, sexism, homophobia, etc. But it's to say we would like to see the same effort with ableism. One of the statistics that we discovered last year in a piece of research that we did around internalized ableism is the fact that 98% of people that we surveyed, and we surveyed a lot of people, want more information about ableism because they don't actually understand it. I think most people think of these big overt acts, using slurs and using very discriminatory remarks. And actually, it's so much more complex than that. And it should be part of our everyday understanding. So those are the kind of two biggest goals. And then the third one is actually empowering disabled people and breaking down internalized ableism. I'd never heard of internalized ableism, and I've been disabled my entire life. And it was only 5 years ago that I actually sat there and went, this sounds like a bit of me. This sounds like what I've been thinking. Why has no one been telling me what this is and why I feel the way I do? So it's also a tool for disabled people to separate that voice from their minds and be able to find kind of peace and also progression and advocacy within their disability journey, whether you're recently diagnosed or whether you're someone that's been diagnosed their entire lives. So a tool for everyone effectively is what we're hoping to achieve.
Very good. Sounds fantastic. I mean, what we were talking about last time as well, about the exposure to those with disabilities sort of being diminished post sort of like 90s, 2000s, when obviously we became a lot better at recognizing disability and a lot better at serving the educational needs of the disabled, but it did mean sort of like an almost segregation effect, essentially. And I was talking to someone about it before, and I basically the sort of the conclusion that I've come to is that when these sort of the next generation, because obviously my generation, sort of talking like it's primary school in the 90s sort of thing, we were very well accustomed. We were schooled amongst those with disabilities. And then obviously as time went by, education sort of became more focused, more intensive, especially around those with disabilities. And then they were sort of moved to more better suited facilities and those sorts of things. But again, that's where that segregation came in, and those as future generations have come along, and obviously that segregation has sort of remained consistent, it's sort of left a void, I think, for generations that came after me, where without that exposure to those with disabilities, and also a void that was also filled by the likes of South Park, by memes, by sorts of less respectful portrayals, or, as we've discussed before, sort of overtly incorrect portrayals of those with disabilities, and then those sort of stereotypes and those caricatures became a reality, or a perceived reality, for a lot of people that don't come across people with disabilities on a daily basis, on a regular basis. And I think that's been an unintended effect, I think, as well, of that, the push in education.
Absolutely. And it's such a difficult balance because there is, again, I preface by saying, are we where we need to be in the provision of educational services for disabled and neurodivergent children? Absolutely not. And I'm going to use a triggering word here. I know lots of people do not like the word special, but special educational needs in schools, are we where we need to be? Absolutely not. So it's such a fine balance between that segregation and exposure to making sure that children have access to the education that they need and the services and the time and the dedication and the specialization. However, I sit here and very firmly say that disability education should be part of mainstream education. It should be something that we are understanding and we are learning about. If we are separating disabled children away from mainstream education, again, I don't like the word mainstream education, then it is the responsibility that we are filling that void of exposure somehow. That's not me sat here saying we should abolish SEND schools, because I do not believe that at all, because we need those dedicated facilities, and the people that work there are just incredible, and the work that they do and the children are incredible. But we need to be filling that void in public education, because it's not part of mainstream education. Like I'm not even 30 yet. I learned all about fair trade chocolate when I was at school, and about, ethical work practices. Great. I needed that education. That was fantastic to receive. But why didn't you teach me the other sides of the conversation that we should also be having around disability? And it's just not part of the conversation yet. And so it's such a fine balance between segregation and exposure. But I think it's using this word exposure very carefully, because what we don't want to insinuate is the fact that we're keeping disabled children in almost as like performing monkeys of, you might come across somebody
No,
like
of
this
course.
at some point in your life. It's about exposure and understanding that disability is everywhere. Disability is not selective. I think it's 82% of disabled people acquire their disability. They're not born with it. So whether you're a child that is non-disabled, there is still that potentiality for you in the future. But it is a really, really difficult conversation to have, and very complex to how we go about the solution.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also think the onus is also on parents as well, because one of the things it's a common thing is like a child will turn around and go, oh, what's wrong with that person, or why is that person like that? And the impulse can be to go, oh, no, just don't be rude, don't point, don't. It's I find it's much better to take it at face value, discuss why that person may be in a wheelchair, what may have happened to them, and then you just explain that they're just like you or I. It's just the fact that they are in a wheelchair and they use that to move around. And and then you sort of demystify it then, because otherwise you create a stigma, you create, oh, we can't talk about that. Mustn't talk about it. Then it gets pushed to one side, and then there's the embarrassment. And then there's the sort of also comes the impulse that I found when I was a child is to feel sorry for people. And
Yes.
it's kind of like, it comes from a good place, but it's also incredibly toxic
Absolutely.
with being as well-meaning as possible, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Like, I was disabled as a child. My disability is progressive, so it's getting worse, for want of a better language. As I get older, it's degenerative. So when I was younger, I had struggles, but they were nowhere near as complex as the struggles that I have now. When I was a child, if anybody called me disabled, I would literally scream and shout and swear and be like, how dare you call me that word? Because I'm not as bad as they are. You know, they're a wheelchair user, they are visually impaired, I'm not in that same category. And I was offended by that. And I can sit here now as a disabled advocate, and you know, that will probably shock quite a lot of people that I'd say that, but I think it's a very real feeling that when you're a child, that word has such negative connotations. And children aren't born with these connotations. We don't come into this world despising and disliking or wanting to ostracize disabled people. It's something that we are taught, whether that's consciously or unconsciously. And when your child does start asking questions or does point out somebody that might be visibly disabled, it's how you handle that situation. And obviously, we're not going to go up to people in the street and say, excuse me, you know, how did you
Yeah.
come to be in a wheelchair? Would you mind answering that question? Because no disabled person wants that kind of violation of privacy. But it's in that moment, you say to your child and you have that conversation, and then you go home and you pick up a book, or you look at some content creation online, or you watch a film with positive disability portrayal. It's, as a parent, how do you then follow that healthy discussion on? So it's also not just a one-time thing. But I think prefacing that as well is that this is obviously a conversation that's very heavily focused around visible differences and visible disabilities, depending on which language you prefer. It's so important that when you're having that conversation about disability, you're also talking about non-visible disabilities and saying to a child, you know, not everybody who is a disabled person, you will be able to tell just by looking at them that they have a disability. So we should always presume, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's making sure you're having that well-rounded conversation to educate your child as early as possible, because as soon as those connotations set in, they set in and they stick, and it's very difficult to unlearn.
Yeah, absolutely. I do agree. That's one of the things I'm very, very cognizant of, especially in the line of work that I'm in, and the sort of exposure that I have to the people that are most affected. It does, I think, and this is the thing is, obviously, so just to work off common definitions, what is, you've probably been asked this a millions of times. What's your definition of ableism?
It's so difficult to condense it down into a single sentence. So I'll give you 3 definitions. So the first definition is the definition that we find in the Oxford English Dictionary, which is the non-favorable treatment of a able-bodied person against a disabled person. Now, inherently within that is ableist language, this use of the expression able-bodied. So that's not a definition we like to go on, because irony is not lost on me that the very definition of ableism is ableist. Ultimately, ableism is defined as discrimination. And you can literally condense it down into that one word, the discrimination against a disabled person. And if you really want to expand it out, you can start talking about macro and microaggressions and conscious and unconscious biases. But if you are looking to describe ableism in a single sentence as to what it looks like and how it behaves, there is no single answer, because everybody is different. no two disabled people are the same, and it intersects with other barriers that somebody might have in their life. So I sit here as a white female in England. The barriers that I face as a disabled person are very different to if I was a Muslim Black woman in London. It's so different and it's so complex and everything is so intersectional. So being able to kind of define it in that sense is impossible. But if you had to put it in one word, it's discrimination and it is violations of human rights.
It's, as soon as you said that definition, it's sort of the Equality Act 2010 springs to mind, that no one should be left at a measurable disadvantage. I believe is the actual term. It's sad that I remember that, but it's in all of my sort of CPDs.
You're talking to follow policy there, so you're fine.
Yeah. The thing that I always point out, so we have a CPD that's around tactile guidance paving. Basically, there's Network Rail has brought out their own version of it. Instead of using two tiles laterally, it uses a single tile. And it's a bit more intuitive. It's a nicer way of doing things. But as part of that sort of course, we go through the Equality Act 2010. And one of the things that frustrates me is how much of a word salad it is. And it just sort of never quite gets to the point. And it leaves... the issue that I have is in its vagary, it sort of allows for... depending on who interprets it, it can be interpreted in many different ways. And I find that that's a bit of an issue for me, especially when you're trying to tell architects or designers or anybody how that they should conduct themselves, when everything is basically, if you feel like it, you can do this. If you don't feel like it, then no one's going to beat you over the head for it, even though it's semi-written into law and advised by guidance as best practice, but nobody's feet are being held to the fire. I always find that a bit of a contentious issue.
Yeah, I think so. We're very lucky in this country to have a separate legislature to a judiciary. And for anybody that doesn't know what that means, that effectively means that our government, our politicians can make the law, but they cannot enforce the law. So when you go to court, you know that the people you are standing up in front of are not going to be, we hope, not going to be influenced by governmental authority or politicians. America, for example, is the complete opposite of that. So they select their judges effectively. So there is a lot of political motivation in the decisions that are made in the courts. The other way in which our government and our judicial system is quite unique, which is why when you're reading legislation, it feels really wordy and like there isn't an actual answer, is because legislation is actually made up of two components. So most people are very familiar with the first component, which is, for example, let's take the Equality Act. That's your piece of legislation. There's actually another component to making a judicial decision, and that's in the UK, we use previous cases to influence decisions in current cases. So how we've interpreted the law, if there is a like-for-like situation, unless there has been a massive update or something has happened, et cetera, a case will be used to model what has previously happened. So there are actually those two streams. Brilliant. That means that in the UK, when you're going into court, hopefully that means you are going to reach a fair trial and a fair hearing, and it's going to be non-biased. Now, the problem with this is the fact that there is loophole upon loophole upon loophole, and the tiniest little fault or error upon a person will mean the case is thrown out and you have lost. And that is the most frustrating thing. Now, we have seen in the UK, there has been about a 200% increase in the number of disability-related accessibility cases in the last 5 years, which is incredible. It means that people are holding people to account. But when you look at the Equality Act, it's so loose and it's so vague. And you've got things like PSED, which is the Public Sector Equality Duty, which is an enhancement of the Equality Act, which says if you work in the public sector, you have these further standards to adhere to. You know, my journey from my house to Parliament, I've run out of fingers to be able to count the violations that I can see. Nobody's paying attention to it. It's not something that is pressed as a major issue. And you're mentioning there kind of accessibility of the built environment. Yes, we have British standards of accessibility and what is expected, but they're optional. They're not enforceable by law. You have to go down the kind of Equality Act and then try and find PSED and try and find a claim that way. If we just said it's compulsory and we just switched it over, we would avoid many complications. But the reason we aren't doing it is because every single individual in this country would come to flaw, would come to fault, and we'd all be being sued up to our eyeballs because there's no such thing as fully accessible. This is the other problem, is that you can't, very difficult to take someone to court over accessibility when there is no such thing as fully accessible. So a prime example would be my co-author, Jamie Shields, is registered blind and likes to communicate with me via voice notes and via imagery, etc., etc. I'm much more of a wordy person and I find it much more digestible when I read things. So our versions of accessibility in that very basic example are completely different from one another because it can never be fully accessible for both of us. So how do you legally enforce accessibility if full accessibility isn't a thing? So that's why there's this kind of why people feel like we're stagnating. Although it may seem like an easy solution to just change the law, it's really not that simple and we really need to think about how to do it. However, we do need to hurry up and do it because we've been thinking about it for 15 years.
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of the things that strikes me though, is there is a bare minimum that we can do now in most cases. For example, in the case of tactile guidance paving, for example, the bare minimum that you can do is go from an entrance to a public building, whether it's a school, whether it's absolutely anything, a hospital, a doctor's surgery, anything. You can take tactile guidance paving, even internally, but particularly, and you can just go to a reception desk, and that's like that is like the bare minimum for anybody that's traveling unassisted. That is like the bare minimum that you can do. It's like, why can't we at least make that somewhat,
Absolutely.
do you know, I mean, mandatory?
Exactly. And
obviously going beyond that point, it adds complication, and that's where you get into the, well, what if someone needs to get past the guidance paving because they're in a wheelchair because they need the clearance, or some people have oversensitivity in the feet and they don't like walking on them, so it enters a bit of a, how do you,
that's what our legislation is supposed to do. It is supposed to cover that bare minimum and then create a pathway for that additional layer of accessibility. But I preface by saying one person's bare minimum is not somebody else's bare minimum. So, tactile paving, stuff like that, should be mandatory everywhere. Like it's unfathomable to me how it's not a legal requirement. But to get somebody to the door is fantastic and incredible. But now that person needs to get in the door and now needs to continue about what they were aiming to do. So it's such a difficult conversation around bare minimum, because again, what is bare minimum? Bare minimum for one person is not the same as another person. And I just think it's such an interesting conversation and necessity for update. We have been going historically in a wave of every 15 years. We receive a new piece of legislation around disability. We're now in the 16th year and we are not hearing a sniff of something new inbound that is going to be coming in within the imminent future. There is obviously conversation about what's going on with the European courts and European human rights, but we should have had one and we haven't. It should have been this year, 2025, if we're following that kind of 15-year regular update, because the world has moved on. Disability has moved on. Technology has moved on. The Equality Act is so unbelievably out of date. It's so out of date.
In terms of your book, one of the more interesting questions, I think, is who do you hope that your book reaches, like outside of just the sort of what you would perceive to be your sort of standard audience? Who do you hope that it lands on the desk of by chance and inspires?
Well, this is the thing, everybody, because I think a lot of people who work in the disability space or accessibility focused space, we are very tired of talking in an echo chamber and arena. It can be very demoralizing, ironically, and I'm going to say something controversial. Sometimes it can be very demoralizing walking to a room and you're educating people that already get it. There was just that little bit of conversation that they wanted to have. And that's amazing. That's progress. That's fantastic. But I want to talk in the arena, and I want people in the arena to have no idea what I'm talking about. Never heard of the things that we're talking about before, never even come across the word ableism. And a lot of the time when we do training and we say to people right at the beginning, what does this word mean to you? Actually, sometimes nothing fills me with more joy when someone messages and says, I've never heard of this word before. And we're like, brilliant. We're in the right space, we're having the right conversation. But it's also disabled people as well. When you're diagnosed, you're not given a handbook on how to do this. Nobody tells you about ableism. Nobody tells you about internalized ableism. Nobody tells you how to advocate for yourself. You're told the very medical model lens of living with a disability of this is your treatment, this is how you manage
Yeah.
yourself, these are the medical
This is your
services
lot.
available. If you're lucky enough to live in a country where you have access to medical services, that's where it stops. And you walk into a workplace, fantastic, amazing, they're really accessible, they're really inclusive, they're disability confident, and they ask you what adjustments you need. And you sit there and say, I have no idea. No one's told me what's going to make my life, more manageable or what barriers it's going to break down. Nobody's telling us that. So it is such a double lens of, one, we want it to go to absolutely everybody to educate themselves and understand our community and how to do and be better. But also it's for our community as well, so that we know how to navigate this world that isn't working for us, because it's so isolating. And if you don't have a disability tribe and you're not part of, a disabled community or your conditions community, it can be very, very isolating and very lonely. Yeah.
Can imagine. That's one of the things after our conversation the other week is I was thinking about representation, and I come from a completely different side of the spectrum of thinking on these sorts of topics. And I used to think, oh, well, why would you need representation if you surely crying out for representation to a certain degree within like films and things like that, you think, oh, it's a lack. I used to think, oh, it's a lack of being able to put yourself in someone else's shoes or whatever. For example, like I used to love the Blade comic books. I got a massive collection of them, all these sorts of things. And obviously it's a black hero, it was a vampire, Black Panther, all these sorts of different things. And then there's aliens and all these. But then I thought of it in terms of like projects. So one of the things that the Network Rail advocates for is having wayfinding steering groups. And I thought, well, sometimes we don't always know what's best for ourselves, particularly in terms of design and things like that. But then I thought everything moves so slowly, and everybody, particularly in the case of where the politicians are concerned, if it's not a topic or a subject that's being driven by someone that really cares about it, it doesn't go anywhere. And that drove home to me. And I thought that is why representation is important. It's that people can champion their own causes and actually see them to fruition, as opposed to having some sort of nominated champion who is hot on it for 6 months, but then never talks about it again because they're not actually being affected by it. So why should they care once the spotlight's gone? I suppose you could say it comes to Jesus moment on that sort of topic.
I mean, representation again is such a difficult one because it's not about inspiring disabled people to get up and go and do something, which is what people think representation is. It's not just, it is also, seeing someone who looks like you, or you can identify with their experiences and saying, well, if they can do it, I can do it too. But we have to be very careful with that being the message around representation, because what you're effectively saying with just that message is, again, the reason disabled people aren't doing stuff is because of us. It's because of how we feel. It's because of X, Y, and Z. The barriers, and again, this is the difference between the medical and the social model. The reason I can't do things is not because of me and my mentality and my ambition or my drive. The reason I can't do things is because I'm living in a world that isn't built for me. And having that second part of the representation conversation of saying nothing about us without us. If you're going to make decisions that affect disabled people have to be present at the conversation. And that's not just health and social care, which, since time immemorial is where our conversation has been. It's the sector we stay in, and that's where we lie. It's not just about health and social care, every single aspect of life. And if we aren't part of those conversations, there you are not going to see progression. But it's not just tokenistic, and it's not getting 10 wheelchair users in a room together and calling that disabled representation. That's not what it is. It's diversity of voice, it's intersectional voices, it's diversity of experience, and that consultation and that conversation actually being used effectively. You have to follow it on. The second part has to happen, because right now we aren't in enough positions of authority. There are some incredible, very authoritative disabled people in this world who are making monumental changes to the world, but there isn't enough of us because historically we've been very overlooked. So for right now, these conversations are one of the biggest assets that we have, but we have to make sure that they are being followed up with. They aren't just in the moment, kind of here, have your tokenistic moment of representation. it's got to be part of the whole food chain.
So one of the other questions I wanted to ask you, what do you see currently is the biggest barrier to accessibility that you're currently sort of you're hearing a lot
Oh,
about?
that's a great one. I genuinely believe, and again, this is speaking from my experience, this is my own lived experience, and for other people, it will be very different. Right now, it's perception. And for me, it's through my own lived experience, it's just perception and stereotypes. People hear my story and instantly they have built up a picture in their mind of what I can do, what I can't do, what I should do, and what I shouldn't do. And my whole entire life, I was asked to take a step back from university because it wasn't the place for me. And I came out with a law degree. Like I did fine. But even my professors were saying to me, you should take a step back. When I was kind of thinking about going to university, it was, well, do you need to go to university if you've got a life limiting condition? Because how long are you going to use your degree for if you're going to die young? And I know that's quite shocking, but it's the truth. It's all of these things. I've had job offers taken away from me after declaring I was a disabled person. This is a very real world that we live in, and people make presumptions. And also, when people see me doing things or speaking out, the amount of times that people say to me, are you okay? Are you managing it? All of these little things, and you just think, will you go away and you live your life? I will live my life. It's not for somebody else to decide what I can and can't do. And instantly, people see me with pity and with sympathy. And that is one of the hardest pills to swallow, is that I know when I meet people, they just feel sorry for me. They don't see anything else. They just feel sorry for me. And the amount of people that say to me lines like, oh gosh, I don't know how you do it. I wouldn't be able to wake up and do what you do every single day and navigate the life that you do every day. I'm like, you've just blatantly said to my face that you'd rather be dead than live my life. How do you think that makes me feel as a person? But they think they're being kind when they say that, because they think they're saying, oh, you're so strong, you're so resilient. And it's like, the more I
Yeah.
understood internalized ableism, the more I realized that even if someone's intention is good, I don't have to take it that way. I am allowed to feel upset by comments like that. And it's taken a long time to reach that space where I've allowed myself to feel how I want to feel about things like that.
In the same, I understand. I think that is, though, again, and it comes down to a lack of knowledge. It comes down to a lack of exposure, and I think that is the natural response when you are sheltered from
Mm.
the
It is.
realities of disability. And I think that is the natural response for a lot of people. And I know it doesn't, and plays out very differently depending on the perspective. Because like I used to feel really sorry for these people. Like why would such a thing happen to such a person? You can sit there and you dote on it, but then you sort of realize it's like that. There's no benefit to it. I think you come to a stage where you just go, there's no benefit to feeling sorry for people. There's no benefit to it. At the end of the day, they're completely compos mentis. That in the cases that sort of people are, there's no point in feeling sorry. It's just, it sounds not from like I don't want to do the whole like conservative, by your bootstrap sort of thing, but that's sort of your lot in life. And I think everybody gets dealt a hand, and everybody, from a personal perspective, like for example, when I was born with scoliosis, so I have quite a severe sort of curve in my back, like curvature in my back. It's about 45-degree angle, I think it is. I can't remember. It's been a while since I've had the X-ray and things, and I was offered surgery and things like that to correct it. But obviously, the surgery has quite a poor like a poor relapse rate, essentially, where I would end up in a wheelchair if they were to operate at some point. And that was sort of when I realized, after being, obviously this is like early teens that this was noticed, I sort of realized that everybody is dealt their lot in life, their hand in life, but it doesn't mean that you shouldn't be respectful, courteous, think of other people, consider other perspectives, but just understand that everybody has their own struggle. You should be respectful of that, and also work in such a way that you can help mitigate where you can, do what you can to help, but also in a way that isn't patronizing or belittling, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I think infantilization is something that the disabled community really has a bugbear with, to put it in very polite language, is that a lot of the time, depending on your disability, and I don't like hierarching disability because it's not something we should be doing. I'm very privileged that I'm able to advocate for myself and I'm able to communicate in the same language as everybody that is around me. But it's this level of understanding. I'm not angry with people when they say these things because I know it's not your fault. I'm angry at the world. I'm angry at the world that you think these things. And it's so difficult in those situations. You're allowed to feel angry. You're allowed to feel whatever you want. And you never, 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 ever, ever know what somebody's going through. And my outlook always is I always just presume that everybody is navigating some kind of health condition until I know otherwise, because you can't spot it. We are all going to experience disability at some point in our life, whether that's ourselves, whether that's illness. Disability isn't permanent. It doesn't have to be permanent. It can be temporary. 1 in 2 people in this country get cancer. That's 1 in 2 people that are going to experience temporary disability or potentially permanent disability. If it's not you, it's your parent or your sibling or your partner or your children. It's going to affect you at some point in your life. And you are going to wish that you were on the right side of the conversation when it didn't affect you, so that you knew when it did affect you, how you were going to manage with that situation and how you were going to advocate and be the best version of yourself to somebody else or to yourself. You're going to wish you wanted to know that before it all happened. But I don't think people talk enough about the mental health consequences that a lack of accessibility and ableism have on disabled people. And it's obviously impossible to explain lived experience. And nothing drives me up the bend more of these social experiments where somebody lives in a wheelchair for 1 day and they understand what it's like to navigate as a wheelchair user, and it's like, but no, you don't. You've experienced 1 day. You haven't experienced that for 50 years. You haven't experienced the physical feelings that somebody might be feeling. It might be pain, it might be tiredness, it might be nausea. You haven't experienced the kind of ableist things that people have said to them, or the lack of people wanting to help. You've done it in a very sheltered environment, and it's not an accurate portrayal. You can never fully describe. No one can ever fully understand. And I recognize that people can only understand to a certain level, but there is that level, and we need to be doing better to understand. If you understood what I was looking for from other people, it's not pity, it's not sympathy. I'm just looking for you to do your part to make sure that the world is a better place. That's it. That's all I want. I don't want favor. I don't want upper hands. I don't want anything like that. Just want to be equal with everybody else. That's it. And I don't think that's asking for the world. I think that's asking for my fundamental human rights. And then I sit here, and even now my internalized ableism voice is going, you're coming across as an angry disabled person, you're coming across as pushy, you're going to put people off. It's like, actually, no, we should not live in a world where somebody asking for their basic human rights is considered to be woke or, outspoken or speaking too far out of their alleyway. And it's like, the whole thing is just, it's such a complexity of avenues. As soon as you come through one, you hit another and another and another and another. And we're just stuck in this maze going round and round and round. And sometimes I sit there and think we need to pull this whole system apart and start again from the base up. But that's not going to happen. So how practically do we fix this?
Yeah. And I think a lot of people have sort of like a everyday sort of like normalcy bias. If you never come into contact with disability, you never see it, and then when it is that perspective of when someone says to you, "Oh, it must be so difficult," or "It must be so hard," that I think that is someone genuinely trying to connect and to reach out in the way that only they can, and they sort of don't know what they don't know, and the unintended consequences. It makes people feel awkward and difficult. And like you said with that saying, "Oh, I don't know how you do it, how you would get out of bed in the morning," sort of thing. And it's how do we expose people to 50, 40 years of a disability in seconds so that they can understand and without going through that lived experience? Very difficult to do. So it's kind of like I think it may end up being some form of eternal conflict, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and we talked about this in the book as well. I'm gonna say something really, really controversial. If you look at analogy of human psychology, human beings are built to survive. That is our primary instinct, is to survive. And the definition of survival has developed and become much more complex as a species. We have evolved. So now one of our primary survival instincts is around financial gain, because financial gain is a necessity for survival. Whereas you look back to our ancestors and Neanderthals living in caves, that wasn't part of the human survival instinct. It was around food, staying warm, and surviving woolly mammoths. That's not something, woolly mammoths are not something we have to negate now, but we have these other components. There will potentially always be this element of human psychology around, and this is highly contested as to whether this is fact or theory, around disabled people being viewed as weak from a human psychological perspective, because we are driven by survival. So this is what a lot of theorists say. Now, I sit here and say, I don't agree with that at all, because somebody, for example, who is autistic, or somebody like me, would I have survived 500 years ago? Absolutely not. But am I surviving now? Absolutely I am, because society has evolved, and we cannot cling on to these excuses of, well, it's natural to feel sorry for somebody. It's natural to pity someone. It's natural to infantilize. It's natural because we've made it that way. If we can undo other survival instincts that we've had historically, we can undo this one as well. So that would be kind of my hot take on those theorists that like to say there will always be a disadvantage to disabled people. I think so, yeah. But that margin that we're facing could be much, 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 much smaller.
That is, funny enough, I was thinking about that on the way walking here today, about disability, and obviously would people have survived 500 years ago? And there are a lot of controversial theories on the topic, and I've sat through them, because I wouldn't have survived. I was born with asthma, so I would have been dead within a month, 2 months, 3 months, maybe max.
I mean, I can't eat or drink anything.
Things.
Like, I'm fed through a tube into my heart. No. I'd be a goner. I really would be a goner very quickly. Yeah.
But this is the thing, is it's what they call Darwinian selection pressures. So it's that, obviously, as medicine has improved and things like that, I try to say things that people aren't going to get upset about, but this is just a theory. This isn't I've not done the research. It's not mine. It's just what I've read online and listened to videos of these various academics. It's that we prolong the life of those that would not have sort of made it back then. And then obviously that has an impact psychologically on the sort of the populace, and also genetically as well, as we move forward. And then the selection pressures have changed as well. So if you think about it, we've also evolved. So my argument against that sort of is the advancement of medicine. Is that part of our evolution, and also bringing people obviously with disabilities into it's sort of part of the new human, if that makes sense. That's part of the human condition now, not what it was. And maybe that will impact our development further into the future, sort of, if that makes any sense to you.
I do. And it's, I think we're both prefacing by saying this is a theory. This is not, one of our opinions. Disability has existed since time immemorial. Again, if you look in the book, you'll note, we've talked about examples of how Roman communities treated disabled children, and they were hidden away, and they were very much seen as it was a curse from God that you had done something, and it was punishment. And I preface this also by saying that we are very much talking about white culture and Western culture when we have this conversation. Obviously, in other cultures in the world, there is very much still this mentality of punishment of God. So just kind of prefacing that there is, again, that additional racial and religious barrier that somebody might be up against. I can sit here and very firmly say, even 20 years ago, I would not be alive, because my condition was only discovered, however many years ago, and my diagnosis moved to this new specific type. But my condition, my genetic disorder I don't know when it first started, but as it's a genetic disorder that's passed generationally, I can imagine it started somewhere, and that was probably a very, very long time ago. Natural selection, yes, is a thing, and it's a theory, and historically, people who were a disabled person with quite a life-limiting condition probably would have lost their lives much earlier than the average individual would have done. And when I say average, I mean average life expectancy. But I remember a very poignant moment was I was very privileged to be asked to do a documentary to raise awareness of the condition that I have. And it was watched by like 1 million people on YouTube, and it was amazing. And I was like, oh my God, I've done it. Like, I've really done this big thing for people like me. And hopefully people have better access to diagnosis and it will save their lives, because unfortunately the nature of my condition is it is a deadly beast, and you need to catch it early to extend your life as soon as possible. 50% of the comments, because it had my parents in it, were, how selfish is your dad to have children? How selfish is he to know that he could have passed that on and he made that decision? And I had never, ever, ever had those thoughts in my life. Never, never once thought to myself, how dare he? How dare he bring me into this world like how I am, because I'm in this world. The prospect of having children in the future. I know people are going to judge me if I choose not to genetically alter IVF, etc., etc. But then they're going to judge me if I do as well. You cannot win. My life may different from everybody else's, but it's still human life, and it's still something I'm so grateful and privileged to be here. We cannot start projecting this mentality that disabled people, by elongating our lives, by better access to treatment, is going to cause some problem in the future. Because again, this is so medical model. Let's think about the fact that disabled people over-index on attributes such as resilience, creativity, the ability to think outside the box. Some of the biggest inventors and creators of the past couple of centuries are disabled and neurodivergent people. I know not a great example. Elon Musk, for example, love him or hate him. Enter your thoughts here. Look at what he's done to the world in terms of development in the last 30 years. Incredible, a neurodivergent person. Let's stop looking at how we're a drain and start looking at how we are such an asset to human development and human psyche, and start utilizing that and tapping into that. So that would be my kind of, how do we flip this narrative of, it's a drain that's going to cause problems further down, and actually say, we are the solutions to your problems. Listen to us and put us where we need to be.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is the thought that I consistently have is we have billions for bombs, we have billions for weapons and arms manufacturing and things like that, but we don't have money to not right social wrongs, but uplift everyone to a certain to a base level where everybody is sorted for. I mean, in 2025, soon to be 2026, why can't we reach that base level of accessibility for all public buildings? Why can't we remodel existing buildings? We have enough money. I mean, the money is based on numbers on a calculator that go up when we say they go up and go down when we say they go down, based on impressions of eggheads with other calculators elsewhere. Do you know what I mean? Why are we not investing into our own infrastructure, our own systems and things when we have enough money to supply bombs and weapons and that cause people to lose limbs in other countries? It's like, I find it such a bizarre.
That equality is now very politically pivoting. And what I mean by politically pivoting is, when we talk about these big buzzwords, equity and equality, typically they sit within a left-wing mentality, or that's where they've been pigeonholed to fit. And anybody that doesn't consider themselves to sit on the left side of politics, so thinking, away from capitalism and towards communism, depending on where you sit on that spectrum. I'm not sat here saying all people that believe in equality are commies. But what I am saying is the fact that it doesn't matter where you sit on the political spectrum or what your priorities are. Equality, and I should say equity rather than equality. Equity is a beneficial tool, no matter your political goals, no matter your social goals, no matter the economic goals. Equity is a pivoting asset that is so underutilized, but it's become so politically charged that there is that concern around it, isn't it? Is woke has now become an insult. And I find that really odd, because the definition of woke literally means to be awake to your surroundings and to other people. Like, to me, that's a compliment, but it's become so weaponized. And so has equality and equity. It's a weaponized additional extra that the left believe in equality and the right don't. And it's so unbelievably such a false narrative that we have to move away from, that equity isn't valuable.
I think from my reading of the situation is everything is done through friend enemy distinction, is how I would term it. So you have people on the right-hand side of the spectrum that believe that, oh, anybody that's on the left, everything they say is absolute rubbish and I don't want anything to do with it. And the same from the left to the right. The conversation that we had last time was talking about, well, how do we make arguments from a right-wing perspective in the case of, or for accessibility, for equality. The problem, so my argument would be there is a duty to take care and to lift up your fellow countrymen from a right-wing sort of conservative perspective, to lift up and conserve your people. Do you know what I mean? To actively improve the lives of your fellow man. As obviously I'm using man universally, not just obviously men, but you know what I mean? Like there is a conservative argument to be had there. I just don't think that the left is particularly good at making that argument. But I do think that there is. I think things are changing. I do think things are changing. I think the left-right distinction is becoming less and less relevant now as time goes by, because everything's started to get a bit more murky.
Yeah, I think what's kind of happened
I'm hoping that goes away.
there's this big misconception that politics is a straight line, and it's not. So just thinking about British politics for a second, I think most people consider Labour on one side of the line and Conservatives on the other side of the line, and Lib Dems sit somewhere in the middle. Political spectrums are not a straight line, they're a horseshoe shape. So at the very top of the left-hand side of the horseshoe, you kind of have Marxism, communism, Karl Marx, quite extremist left views. At the top of the right-hand side of the horseshoe, you find very extremist reviews around capitalism and very right-wing values. Labour, Conservatives, Lib Dem, in the grand spectrum of things, used to sit actually quite close together somewhere in the centre, with Lib Dem sitting just to the left-hand side of the middle of the horseshoe. What's happened is there is this enormous space between the top of the horseshoe and where our political parties actually sit. And so those spaces are starting to be filled, either with new parties like we've seen come out recently on the left, I won't name them, and parties that we've seen come up close onto the right. And it's actually starting to draw voters away from those three central parties. And so those three central parties are having to move with the voters. What the biggest thing to talk about here is the fact that that extremist left and that extremist right are closer together than at the bottom of the horseshoe where our political parties sit, because there is actually a lot of similarity.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That the distinction there is us versus them. I would say it's though from the right perspective, it's countrymen, and for the left, it's more universalism. That's the only difference between them. From my reading of the situation.
That's a bold statement.
Yeah, history would. I think history would back me up there, but let's not go down that road.
I think we'll avoid that one. That could get very complicated very quickly.
Yeah. But yeah, I'm sort of hopeful for the future from the accessibility to landscape space with the new new technologies coming in. Is there anything that you've seen that makes you go, oh wow, this is really going to make a difference currently?
I mean, the obvious answer is AI. The power of AI, and AI has its negatives and it has its enormous concerns. Concerns around jobs, concerns around how we're going to operate kind of societally. But AI is the most incredible tool that is just changing people's lives left, right, and centre, whether that's from a neurodivergence perspective, around dyslexia, around ADHD, around time management, around efficiency. But it's where is AI going to take us from a medical perspective as well, where you've got this never-ending mind, effectively. Diagnosis could improve, access to treatment could improve, efficiency of time, because you're removing that human error. And you speak to any disabled person who has a non-visible disability or a chronic condition, can guarantee you it took them years to be able to seek their diagnosis and get if they're even have the privilege of being within the correct diagnosis framework. That margin of human error and that improvement efficiency is going to change people's lives. Obviously, we need to highlight the negatives in that. AI it's an incredible asset for the future if we do it right, but it's making sure that as a human society, we have got things like this, these big developmental changes very wrong historically, are we going to get it right this time? And the only way we're going to know that is sitting and waiting.
Absolutely. The biggest thing that is being discussed is obviously bias, because there is a huge bias in AI based on the people that put the information in and the information that it receives. Obviously, it will never be bias free. But I have found, I have found a lot of use in AI from like a medical perspective, because obviously you can type in a load of symptoms or multiple different things. Not to slate the NHS, but I've been in a few GP surgeries where they do similar things, where they Google a few things, or they use like a medical.
I have a rare disease. Every time I see a doctor, they have to go and Google what it is. And I might just go Google it because,
Yeah, of course.
well, yeah.
The human brain for knowledge and medical terms and diagnoses is only so finite. AI is obviously never ending, and you could probably mention something incredibly obscure and it will go away and find you a paper on it and be able to give you all sorts of different remedies and ways of dealing with it.
Yeah, it's bias is a real concern. But again, it goes back to what we were talking about near the beginning of the conversation of if you've got the right voices, part of the conversation, hopefully for the point of design, we can eliminate, obviously you'll never eliminate it completely, but if you're taking the bias of the human mind versus the bias of an AI entity, if you asked me which was worse right now, I'd pick the human. And I think that's a real teller that the AI bias does concern me, but I'd feel safer that I wasn't going to be treated as biasly with the AI than I was the human individual. And that is quite a shocking thing to say, but I think it's how most people feel. And obviously I'm not talking to for everyone, but I think it's how most people feel.
Yeah, this is the other thing, is it's like we said with like the sort of polarization and things. It's like, does AI become like the happy medium between everyone, the neutral party, so to speak, where we feel like we can't really trust. It's a horrible thing to say, but the idea that you couldn't trust another person or another individual to treat you in such a way, do you then lean on an AI to be able to administer information, help, assistance, all those sorts of things?
Yeah, I think, the use of the word neutrality is so interesting, because what is neutrality? Like, the human brain, it's almost like, again, another piece of human psychology is the human brain can't fathom black holes very well. We can't fathom the concept that the universe is infinite because our brains cannot comprehend it. It's not something, you can't picture it, you can't visualize it, you can't explain it, and therefore the human brain doesn't like the concept and it starts overriding itself, and instantly you will fall. You say the word black hole, you don't picture nothing, you picture a black hole with some stars around it. Human brain wants to try and comprehend the information. I do not believe that there is anything such as, I don't believe neutrality exists. It's not something that we have fathomed as a species yet. And it's not something that we're going to fathom within AI, because as you said, we're the one giving it the information. It's seeking its information from us. The human being is incapable of neutrality because everything you think, everything you believe is based on where you come from, your upbringing, the experiences that you've had. My beliefs living in England are very different to somebody who might be from an extremist zone of the Middle East. But our versions of neutrality are incredibly different from one another. Our versions of what is right and wrong are very, very different from another. The human brain can't comprehend that middle part because we have to fill it with something all the time. So is AI ever going to be unbiased or neutral? No. But can we make sure we regulate it with as many voices as possible from each sides of those conversations, from every different angle, so that it can reach a harmonious point in the middle as best as possible? Yes. But we have to make sure that that happens. We are the ones that have to make sure that that data going in is representative of all sides of the conversation.
Absolutely. And I think that this is the key, is that we need everybody talking.
Yeah.
From all perspectives, all angles. Those that don't know, those that do know, and everyone else in between.
Agree more with that.
I think that'd be a very good place to finish then. Thank you very much for another wonderful conversation.
Thank you very much. I thought whenever we get talking, we always get talking for a long time. So thank you so much for having me, and wishing you guys all the success with future episodes. Can't wait to listen back.
Thank you very much. Well, if you do want to tell people where they can buy your wonderful book before we end. once again?
So it's available globally on all kind of big global platforms. If you head to our website, which is www.disabledbysociety.com, we also have a hyperlink which will take you to certain regions around the world. But easiest place is on Amazon, and will get shipped to you as soon as possible. If you want to message us directly, we are absolutely chronically online on LinkedIn. So please do message us on LinkedIn. And for accessibility, we can direct you where you need to be. The book is available in paperback, Kindle, and also audiobook as well, so that we're as accessible as possible. And we have an incredible voice artist called Ellie, who has lived experience herself, who has narrated the book wonderfully for us.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Pleasure as always.
Likewise.